From Fox 8 Sports, this is the Overtime Podcast.
From the Fox 8 studios in New Orleans, this is the Fox 8 Overtime Podcast. I am your host, Sean Fazende. Riding shotgun next to me, as he does each and every podcast, is Andre Johnson Jr. Do not forget the JR. Trust me, you do not want to do that. Before we get to today's content, be sure to like, share, rate, review. If you're watching us on our YouTube channel, be sure to hit that subscribe button, get the bell notification for when we drop that fire content. And Andre, today we got a good show, no doubt about it, but it is Friday. End of the work week for all of you. We keep on working, but that's okay. But look, it's been an interesting week. I think we've started the week off with, from the post-draft analysis into these other facets of the, post-draft setup for the Saints. And one important part of the process is the undrafted rookie pool, which the Saints were very active in, because this organization has always been an organization that has been open-minded when it comes to undrafted rookies. I thought it was the perfect opportunity to close out the week with that being our big picture today.
Definitely, and undrafted free agents, undrafted rookies in particular, they've played a big role in recent history for the Saints. I mean, the guy who's currently penciled in as the number 2 wide receiver on the depth chart,
no doubt,
Rashid Shaheed, undrafted free agent. So the guys that we're going to go through today, we have 3 guys for you, undrafted free agents who were signed by the Saints, who could potentially make the roster and have an impact down the road.
Yeah, and I think this is it's a very important aspect of it, because it's hard for people to understand. Well, why? I don't understand the undrafted rookie. Why did they just draft these guys? There's different things that come into play when it comes to certain grades and certain situations that come out throughout the draft, and you draft a guy knowing there are other guys you could draft at that moment. And if you're a Saints team or any organization, you're just praying that player is available when you have a chance to kind of make your pitch to them. And the Saints have certainly done that with a number of undrafted free agents. And, we have our eyes on 3, and we're going to kind of give our thoughts on each one. I think the biggest one, I don't think this is a surprise, because I think if you just kind of pull and if you just look at the list, and then when I went back and watched the tape, I think this guy really jumps out. Almost to the point where it almost felt like, man, if the Saints had one more draft pick, they probably would have used him on this guy. Who are we starting with?
We are starting with Dallin Holker, the tight end out of Colorado State. He spent 3 years at BYU, but really exploded on the scene last year at Colorado State. Second team AP All-American. He was a finalist for the Mackey Award, which is the award for the best tight end in the country. We know Brock Bowers wound up winning that, but this is a guy who was also in the running for that same award. Dallin Holker, at a position that the Saints need. What are your thoughts on him?
Yeah, Dallin Holker, Colorado tight end, started his career off at BYU. Pretty underwhelming stint at BYU. Did the Mormon mission at some point in there, so there's a gap in his college football resume. But, his final year at Colorado State, he made the most of the opportunity ahead of him. 64 catches, 767 yards, 6 touchdowns. Before you look at anything else, stat-wise, what he did last year, whatever the case may be, I'll give kudos to Catherine Terrell, who had gotten these numbers out. At least that was the first person I saw had it. The Saints gave him the highest guarantee, $235,000 guarantee. It's very important in the undrafted pool, the amount of money that you have and that you can divvy out to these undrafted rookies. $235,000 guaranteed shows me that Saints really, really wanted this guy, and they were really, really afraid other teams are going to try to get him. So $235,000 guaranteed tells you a lot about what they feel about this guy. And you mentioned a couple names in terms of, like, there's always that one or two that just jump out like, okay, there's a strong chance this guy's going to make the team. When Shaheed signed here a couple of years ago, everyone knew he was making the team. He was coming off the injury, but he was awesome when he closed out the season before he got injured in college, and everyone knows he would have gotten drafted had he not gotten injured. Holker's case is interesting because I saw a 6th round grade on him. You never really know when you get to day 3 picks, but there's a couple things that really stood out. And this is probably the most important, he has a very good sense of timing, both on the football field and just kind of when to pop, because the story of college football last year for the first 3 weeks of the season was Colorado State versus Colorado, or Colorado. The Colorado was the story, and Colorado State was a portion of that because there was a war of words between Prime and Colorado State head coach. But then the actual game started, and Holker might have been one of the top 2 or 3 football players on the field, regardless of position. 6 catches, 109 yards, 2 touchdowns. Had one of the best plays I've ever seen. Shoestring catch on a wide, shallow cross. Catches the ball and outraces everyone to the end zone. He had 11 catches, 112 versus Middle Tennessee State, 6 catches, 57 against San Diego State, 7, 85 and a touchdown. Boise State, 5, 47 and a touchdown against Washington State. Here's what jumps out. Great hands, great route running ability. He can't block for anything. That's fine. He's not going to block. He's gonna have to learn how to block, but he's not a blocker right now. But this is a position that people just aren't talking about in terms of you can use a little life to this position. We talked about Juwan Johnson, and I think a lot of us have high hopes for him, but it took him a little while for him to get there last year, and you just wonder, is he ever going to be that explosive tight end that everyone thought? That's one. 2, he's a pass-catching tight end, and this is a situation where you could certainly utilize a pass-catching tight end into this room, and he runs a variety of routes. He runs that shallow cross. He runs that square in, that basic, that sail route, that over route, and you're in a offense now where there's a lot of play action, a lot of boots, a lot of misdirection, and when you're kind of lined up in that in line at the wide position, you can drag across the field or you can kick out to the slot and run a little sail route, which is a concept the Saints run a lot. I think that's really an asset. And if you look at this depth chart and you look at the totality of the 53, I think Holker's got a more than good chance at not just making the roster, but perhaps getting on the field to be the 3rd or 4th tight end. You talk about Taysom Hill, he's all over the place. We know that. Foster Moreau is more of a blocking tight end. We just talked about Juwan Johnson, but we don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, but on paper and based off what I watched on his highlight tape that I saw, this is a guy that he's got great hands, great run after catch. I think this is a guy that can make the roster and who knows, maybe even contribute this season. Definitely.
And when it comes to the tight end position with the Saints, I always go back to my favorite stat when it comes to that, and that's that the Saints last season, excluding Taysom because he was everywhere, had the 7th fewest yards at the tight end position out of all the teams in the NFL. So that is a position, like you mentioned, that could use some production, that can use an injection of playmaking. And Dallin Holker definitely was that kind of playmaker in college last year at Colorado State. You mentioned the routes that he can run. He's also not bad after the catch.
He's fantastic after the catch. Yeah.
Exactly. He's got some solid athleticism to him. And we talked a few weeks ago about the Saints needing a guy who can catch a 5-yard route and maybe turn it into a 25-yard gain. And I think there's a chance that we could see a lot of him in the training camp preseason time, because one positional battle that we talked about a few days ago, Jake Haener versus Spencer Rattler, that's something that's going to dominate the summer when it comes to talking points in training camp. Those two are not going to be throwing to starters for the most part. They're not going to be throwing to the Olaves and the Rashid Shaheeds all the time. They're going to be throwing to the second crop of guys. And one guy who comes to mind from last year when we were watching Jake Haener, because Jake Haener a lot of times was taking 3rd-team reps behind Derek Carr and Jameis Winston, Lucas Crow.
Yeah, absolutely.
He was a guy who was on the team, and he was pretty impressive at times in training camp, and especially in the preseason. We saw a lot of Lucas Crow because he was the main guy catching passes from Jake Haener. So when you talk about Dallin Holker, he's a guy who we could potentially see a lot in one of the more high-profile battles that's going to take place in training camp.
And you watch him, there's a football speed he plays with. I think he clocked like a 4.78 or a 4.84. It wasn't great, but there's a football speed he plays with. There's a football pacing that he plays with that he just has a natural feel for it. I'm not sure what happened at BYU the first 3 years where he was pretty ineffective, but he figured it out at the perfect time at Colorado State. And you're right, because I wrote on here, yak, because I still believe this offense needs true yak pass catchers, guys that can catch the ball and run after the catch. That's all over his tape, catching that little shallow cross, catching that there's a seam route, there's a square in, and he's catching it and he's running it. I mean, that type of skill set is something that I think will catch the eye of this new offensive staff, but also perhaps bring an element to that room that they don't necessarily have right now. And, who knows what can happen. I do know this. When you give a guy that much as an undrafted rookie, $235,000 guaranteed, the Saints certainly feel like he's a player that they have a legitimate interest in and a legitimate chance at making the roster. A couple things I did see from a technical standpoint, he runs a lot of routes, and I love that from the inline wide tight end or the slot position player where he lined up quite a bit. Probably going to need a little bit of refinement on some of those routes, just because of the leverage and what you have to do from a play standpoint in the NFL is not quite as much spacing, but I do think there's a nice base to work with this player that I think has a legitimate shot at making this roster.
Definitely. The need is there for the Saints. The opportunity is going to be there heading into training camp. And fortunately for him, nobody in that tight end room has really stood out and made you say, oh, yeah, he's for sure the guy.
Yeah.
Jimmy Graham from last year, he won't be back, most likely. So I don't know if he'll be that red zone option, although I think he did excel in the red zone at times in college. But there's definitely a spot for him to come in. And I'm not going to say he's going to start and, catch for 600 yards this season, but to make the team at the very minimum and show flashes in training camp in the preseason, there's definitely an opportunity for him to do that there. And then maybe further down the line, we could see him in the regular season.
You never know. And, if you're Holker, just get here. Apparently he had a lot of suitors. Apparently that's what he talked about, him having a lot of suitors, but the Saints fought the hardest. They gave him the most money, and now he's here with the Saints. A smart move by him because, he got paid and he's got a legitimate shot here to make the roster. As I said before, you just wonder if the Saints had had another pick somewhere, if maybe they would have drafted this guy, Dallin Holker out of Colorado State. Who's next?
Up next, the number 2 guy that we're going to talk about today, a running back Louisiana football fans may be familiar with from UL, Louisiana Lafayette, Jacob Kibodi. 729 yards, 7 touchdowns rushing last year, 5.7 yards per carry. Not a lot of receiving work, 9 catches, 79 yards, 1 touchdown. What did you see from Mr. Kibodi?
Well, this is an interesting one because, he's a Louisiana product, but I just don't recall him very much when he was a student. He was at Christian Life Academy. He's from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, at least according to a profile I saw. I hope I'm correct with that. It would make sense. A UL guy started his career at A&M, 3 years at A&M. There was some sort of transition year somewhere between A&M and UL. And he's a guy that it took him a little while to get going. He's one of those 6-year super senior guys because of the COVID year. This is not right. 729 yards, 5.7 yards a carry, and then 7 touchdowns. I just like the fact that A, he plays running back. B, you look at the history at the running back position when it comes to undrafted free agents, from Pierre Thomas to Travaris Cadet to Kyrie Robinson. There's been a lot of undrafted rookies at the running back position that have certainly made their way onto the roster for the Saints. You're talking about this offense that you're running. The Shanahan-Kubiak offense, they have turned lesser running backs into 1,000-yard rushers over the years. That's just been a staple of what they do. And I think there might be room for a bigger back. He's 6'2", 220 pounds. And, we saw Jamal Williams a season ago. I don't think Jamal Williams would get cut, but I do think Jamal Williams looked like he lost a step last year. I felt like, he had hit a wall in his career last year. He just was not the same player, especially when you talk about where he was the season before that in Detroit, where he led the league in touchdowns. So Kibodi was a guy based off of his size, based off his position, I think might have a chance based off the depth chart at the running back position. It may be a shot. Perhaps he's a practice squad guy to start off, but if he comes in, learns the system, and has the right attitude, and just given the numbers at that position, he may have a chance.
Definitely. And when you think about today's NFL running back, the guys who are really excelling at the top of the league, the majority of them are kind of the elusive guys, the receiving guys. There aren't as many big power running backs as there were back in the day, but that doesn't mean that there's not still a place for those guys in the league. And especially when you get into those short yardage situations, when you look on the roster, Kamara's not a power guy. Kendre Miller's not a power guy.
Not really, no.
Jamal Williams is a power guy, but he's getting a little older. He's not having the same opportunities that he was when he was in Detroit. The only concern for me really about Kibodi, well, there's 2 of them, He didn't get a lot of receiving work at UL,
Yeah.
which, again, that's coaching. That's something you can develop in him. It's not that he can't catch the ball. It's that he didn't have a lot of opportunities.
Yeah.
Different caliber guy, but I remember Leonard Fournette leaving LSU.
Yeah.
He didn't have a lot of receiving opportunities, but he just said that was the offense at LSU, and he was excited to learn it. And when he got to Tampa Bay, you saw him able to do that a little bit. And my second concern when it comes to Cabot is he is going to enter the league as a 25-year-old rookie. He'll turn 26 in October.
Oh, wow, that's older. That's old even for an older class.
That's what I'm saying. So
because Holker is 24. Cabot would be 26. He turns 26
in October. And the way teams be acting, they act like
right.
28 is 78 when it comes to an NFL running back.
That's man, I'm gonna be happy when that, because this is all COVID people, so it's all like you get the redshirt year plus the bonus year, so you're getting these older classes, and you saw how much it threw for everyone for a loop in the quarterback class, but the 26 is old. I mean Taysom was 27 when he came in, but Taysom did the Mormon mission thing. But yeah, this is an interesting the fact that he's a little bit older, but I mean 26 is still 26. I mean, for an undrafted rookie, he might have a shot even at that age.
Definitely, and especially.
So he would be older. He's older than Kendre Miller, probably.
Yeah, he's definitely older than Kendre, but the miles on his body, you can argue the miles on his body maybe aren't as high as many other running backs would be at 26. So we'll see how that turns up as we get into our third player. And Sean, I told you when we were doing mock drafts and you mocked a punter to the Saints, I said I wanted an Australian punter battle. Now that punter got drafted in the 4th round, so we didn't get him. But the third guy who we're going to talk about, who the Saints drafted, an Australian punter by the name of Matthew Hayball out of Vanderbilt, averaged the 4th most yards per punt in the FBS with 47.6. So the guy's got a big leg. What did you see out of Mr. Hayball?
Well, I'm not going to break down the ins and outs of punting because I'm just not a master at that. But I know he had a 47.6 yard average, and I just think there needs to be a competition at the punter position because Lou Headley made the roster. He beat out Blake Gillikin, but there were moments last year it was like, you don't really have to stick with this guy because he was an undrafted rookie and a less patient coaching staff. They gave them more than enough reasons to move on both guys, Blake Grupe and Lou Headley. Somehow they stuck with it. But as I've said before, and I will say again, it's not that I think punter is the missing link or the big issue or a major issue because Headley, there are certain things that he did. Apparently, Rizzy told us a bunch of stuff where some of the things they asked him to do, he did well at. But I just think if you're looking at the details in the subtle areas where a team can improve, that you don't necessarily jump off the top of the page. And we know run defense, we know passing offense, we know turnovers, but let's just say there's a competition and one guy is able to help your defensive field position by just a few more yards on average per game, which could equate to one extra first down an opposing offense has to get, which could equate to one less touchdown they can score, one less field goal they can score. I think this team has to look into that. They did it with the kicker, the Irish kicker versus Blake Grupe. Now you got 2 Australian punters. This is a no-brainer. There has to be a competition, and there's only 2 on the roster. And last year, Headley beat out the incumbent. This year, I think Hayball can beat out Headley if there's a good competition at that position. Last year, I thought both guys were going to get cut, to be honest with you, at punter. Because I didn't think either one played particularly well. But hopefully Hayball can come in, take advantage of this opportunity because I think there needs to be a legit competition at the punter position.
I agree. And that is the theme of what I was going to talk about is competition. And you look across every position on this team for the most part, and there's going to be a competition somewhere heading into the season. You look at quarterback, you've got the QB2 battle that'll likely unfold between Hayner and Rattler.
Yeah.
You look at running back, Kendre Miller, Jamal Williams could be an interesting RB2 battle.
Yeah.
Wide receiver. We don't have a definitive number 3 guy right now. There's going to be a battle there. Offensive line, there are 3 offensive line spots that are going to be up for grab. We'll see who comes out of there. Defensive line, Carl Granderson, Cam Jordan, Chase Young, if he's healthy when the season starts. There's going to be a competition there.
Yeah.
You look at the secondary, you got 3 cornerbacks, assuming Lattimore's there. We know he'll start, but Paulson Adebo, Alante Taylor, Kool-Aid McKinstry.
Yeah.
there's going to be a battle there. You mentioned the Irish kicker that came in to challenge Blake Grupe. Why not have a competition at the punter position too? It elevates the two guys. If Lou Headley wins, this guy could push Lou Headley to be even better than he is right now.
And honestly, like, that's it. I mean, if I'm Dennis Allen in my first team meeting, I'm telling the team, and no mixing of words whatsoever, or mincing of words. I don't know how you said that expression. Mixing, mincing. I don't know. Mincing. Okay. I want this to be the most competitive training camp of your life.
Yep.
Of our lives, of my staff, of my tenure here. I want 2024 training camp to be as intense and as competitive at every single position. We'll see who responds. And I think bringing in a punter like this and making it an open, legitimate competition is something to really watch going forward. Now, look, we're going to break down some position battles and position competitions when we get closer and closer to camp on this pod. I can promise you that. But on the surface, I think the punter battle might be a decent one to watch going forward.
Definitely. And like you mentioned, it's something that kind of gets swept under the rug at times because it's punting and it's special teams. But punting is important, especially if you're in a position where your offense will struggle at times. Punting is very important because the difference between a 37-yard punt and a 48-yard punt, that's a first down.
Yeah,
that's look, potential field goal position.
And look, this organization had it. They didn't have to worry about it for over a decade.
Yeah.
And, there were times during many stretches during Morstead's career here. I can recall it was a stretch when Teddy took over where there was 2 or 3 games where they didn't score a touchdown, and punting was a major deal. Punting was the big deal. So it matters, man. It all matters.
And they won those games. I
think. And they all won. They were 5-0 with Teddy.
They were 5-0 with Teddy, and I think if I remember correctly, 2 or 3 of those games, they didn't score a touchdown.
Or if it was just like one. I remember one game, 12-10, 13-3. So my point is, they matter. And I know it's not the glamour position, but I think it's a position that everyone must respect, and the Saints certainly must take serious. Look, these aren't the only UDFAs. We're skipping over a few, but these are the 3 that really jumped out to us in terms of what they bring, where they play, and if they could have a legitimate shot at making the roster. There's going to be other players, look at the interior of the offensive line. Maybe somebody emerges, defensive line. Who knows? But these were the top 3 that we were sort of pinpointing in terms of the undrafted rookie class that could make this roster. But like I said before, they could always be more. Last year there was Grupe, there was Headley. A year before that, it was Rashid Shaheed. We know the stories about Pierre Thomas, Lance Moore, all those guys. So it's something to really watch. It's something to really pay attention to. The offseason, I guess, rookie minicamp.
Yep.
Then the OTAs minicamp, and then obviously training camp on the West Coast. I think that might be it for us this week. You got anything else for us?
Started.
All right, Andre Johnson Jr. is ready for the weekend. I'm ready for the weekend. I hope y'all are ready for the weekend. So we'll be back next week on Monday. For now, though, Andre Johnson Jr., I am Sean Fazende. We'll catch you guys next time on Overtime.